I'm waiting for that Zoom lady. Yes, the Zoom lady is on. Maybe. Oh, my, I don't hear. Hi. Welcome to the think tank. My name is Ryan Erickson, the think tank BGSU sponsored Academy of Management, Schmidhorst College of Business, and all manner and sort of things and places and beings on the BGSU campus in Bowling Green State University, Bowling Green, Ohio. My name is Ryan Erickson. I'm hosting today. And our topic, as you probably know from having seen it in various forms of social media, is what happens when a social scientist meets a neuroscientist or something of that ilk. We have two of those folks here in the room, Stephen H. Cady of BGSU and the Schmidhorst College of Business, and Jari, I love the Yadi, Willing also of BGSU. And today the game is, as usual, we'll have Steve and Jari do 15 or so minutes each. We'll break a little bit in between and after go to breakout sessions as are always wonderful for a few minutes, hopefully maybe 10 or so. Come back here then after a short minute or so breathing for a group discussion where we will dive into what has emerged in the breakout rooms. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So, Steve, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks. And it's really good to see everybody here. And Jari is one of my favorite scientists on the planet. And I'm a fan actually of Jari's. And he and I met on a dissertation committee. He sat in as a external rep that's on campus. And I'm so glad we do that here at BGSU. And as we were sitting there, I asked him a couple questions that were related to neuroscience, his background, and the dissertation in the behavioral sciences. And that led me down the most fun rabbit hole ever, and really had a good time. And then I said, "Can we talk later?" And then can we talk some more? And then can we have some coffee? And then before you know it, we were talking about this intersection here. That this article that you see here with Teo will put into the chat kind of popped up as a potential article to write. And then my son, who's in biology and he's applying to medical schools and things like that right now, um, and he was getting his degree in biology at the time, was curious. And I said, well, join us and help us with some research and so forth. So I invited my son in, which is always wonderful to do when we, as parents, get to have our kids connected with some of our work. And so we wrote this article here on the AI imperative on becoming quintessentially human. So we're going to today take this is sort of the inspiration for the day. I'm going to talk a little bit my part, and then Jari will pick up and share his part, and Ryan will take us through a guided conversation and so forth. So I'm really grateful that I've met you, Jari, and your dad too, who is quite an interesting man. I really consider myself blessed to know people like yourself and so creative. We want to write a book. I told him I want to write a book
Likewise.
called yeah, thank you. And I told him I want to write a book called Rats. I'd see it on the bookshelf. You go into the airport and you look over and you see this book sitting there and it says Rats, because there is so much research that has been done with rats that has impacted our lives in ways we never even dreamed of. And almost every aspect of our lives, rat research has impacted our lives in big ways. And so I'd love to do something like that one time. So that's my next little thing with Jari. So let's jump in. This notion of becoming quintessentially human. And what I'd like to do is just start with the idea that this has been around, this has been coming for a long time. Can you all see my screen? A little thumbs up there? A little thumbs up? Yeah, everything good? All right, so I'm going to be playing some videos. And so I'd love for you to be able to hear, make sure you can hear the video and so forth. And I'm going to be sharing some things as we go throughout. So here's the first one that some of you might remember.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contradictory thoughts. Unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people. One will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
As you think about that picture, notice the rows in aisle. Notice the people sitting down. Notice the screen. Notice the person running. Notice the different people and so forth in that image. It's going to be popping back up as we continue. The thing is, AI has been coming for a long, long time. And this notion of human-centric skills, I think, is really important because as we adapt to an AI-driven world, the thing here is that if AI is automating everything, routine tasks, making things simple for us and simplifying life in so many ways, well, creativity and empathy and adaptability will become really a lot more important to us because those things that we have all struggled to do, all these things that are going to become so done like that for us, which 100 years ago, there were a lot of things today that are done like that were not done 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and so forth. And so we need these human capabilities, which AI can't replicate. And what are the human qualities that AI can't replicate? And I believe that these qualities are essential for driving innovation and resilience in the workplace. So what I want to talk about is work and family. I don't know if anybody here thinks you can separate work and family, but you can't. You can't. You can do work and family at family, and you can try to separate it all. But really, when we are following our passion, particularly as AI becomes much more instrumental in us having to do quintessentially human things, which are more passion-driven topics, things that we really care about, the intersection is going to be even more because you can't leave your work at home because you love what you do. And you actually are probably integrating those. Those of you that are living your passion right now probably notice how there's a little bit of overlap and you have to kind of watch it. But essentially, AI is going to have big implications for both work and family. And I want to talk about both of those right now. So the first thing I'd like to ask you all, you can do a thumbs up. Would you marry you? Would you hire you? Would you pick you for a best friend? Okay. Yeah. So, and a lot of the things is we got to be the change we want to see in the world. But why would an employer pick you? Why would a partner pick you? We're going to talk about that. It's about competitive advantage. And this is a business language term, VRIO. And what it gets at is this notion that what do you offer at work with your friend, a coworker, your office, your partner in life, your friend, your spouse, whatever it may be. What do you offer? What do you provide? What do you bring that's valuable? That's first. Then the question is, if what you bring is valuable, is it rare? And if it's rare and valuable, is it hard to imitate? If it's valuable, rare, and hard to imitate, do you do that thing that's valuable? Do you do it operationally well? Okay. So it's called competitive advantage. So if a company has a product or service, if you can do something that's valuable, it's rare, it's hard to imitate, and it's operationally excellent, or you do it well, right? Those four things, that's your competitive advantage in your relationship with your spouse, your partner, your team, your organization, the people you're with. So here's the thing. When we look at work, we know that AI is expected to impact job roles across all sectors. AI is going to replace 300 million full-time jobs globally, 40% of the global workforce. The exposure could be even more for pronounced or advanced economies where 60% of the jobs will be impacted, ultimately reshaping the nature of all of work. Well, what is it replacing? What does AI do that's valuable, rare, hard to imitate, and operationally excellent? Well, AI can do things that that fundamentally potentially replace a lot of jobs and specific services that people need. And they're doing it now in many, many profound ways. And it's getting even more. You have people out there that can be assistants. Your personal assistant. You can clone yourself. Did you know you can have yourself cloned as a supervisor or as and 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 you can have as a supervisor, you can have a clone of you that can supervise people for you while you work on other tasks, and more, all kinds of different things. Even like, for example, they have socially sensitive AIs, and this is advanced since 2017 in remarkable ways, for call centers, giving real-time coaching to people on how to be more sensitive and be more human, be more able to. There's now research showing that AIs get higher customer service ratings than people do in customer service calls. And like at Unilever, they use AI, and I have a lot of friends now that told me that they have been getting interviewed by AI. AI is reviewing their resumes and their letters of reference, and they're having AI interviews where it's analyzing them and it's making decisions on who gets the job or who gets to the next level of the interview. It's pretty wild to think about that. So let me come back up here and watch this.
Accessing the extras section. Did you know the motto of Detroit is, "We hope for better things"?
For starters, what should I call you?
I'm Chloe. And you, what's your name?
Oh, John. My name is John.
Delighted to meet you, John.
Could you tell us a little about yourself and what you can do, Chloe?
Of course. I'm the first personal assistant built by CyberLife. I take care of most everyday tasks like cooking, housework, or managing your appointments, for example.
And I understand you're the first android to have passed the Turing test. Could you tell us a little more about that?
I really didn't do much, you know. I just spoke with a few humans to see if they could tell the difference between me and a real person. It was a really interesting experience.
But this is the first time in history that man has created a machine more intelligent than himself. I gather your brain can perform several billion operations per second, is that right?
Absolutely, but I only exist thanks to the intelligence of the humans who designed me. And, you know, they have something I could never have.
Really? And what's that?
A soul.
So, socially sensitive AIs, clones, coworkers, supervisors, hiring, picking you out and deciding if you're going to get hired, replacing and actually doing a better job of giving customer service, patient and kind and willing to listen to you yell and scream at them because you're frustrated. And they're just the empathy is shown. And then you go home. You leave work and you go home. And then you leave home and you go to work. Well, what role will AI play in that experience? Watch this.
朝ですよ。起きてください。ねえ、起きてってば。おはよう。
おはよ
あ、今日雨が降るかもしれないから傘持って行って。急がないと遅刻しちゃうよ。
う。行ってきます。
いってらっしゃい。気をつけてね。
19ページ、商品のラインナップについての。
おかえりなさい。
なんかさ、家で誰かが待ってるっていいもんだな。さっき思ったんだ。帰ってくるとき。おやすみ。
おやすみなさい。
You get your own gate box if you want. And then you can eventually get married to your avatar because people are marrying their avatars. And the little lips on the end of that little stick are so that they can see them in 3D on the thing and bend over and kiss them at the point that they say I do. And all kinds of replacements. And you think about work. What's going on with us? Why is it that it's so easy to replace humans right now? Why are humans more easy to replace now than they've ever been? I'm going to talk about that here. I think what's important is that we have got to develop quintessentially human skills that are less replicable by AI. We need to emphasize the human skills that, around innovation, creativity, adaptability, innovation, and those kinds of things. Those are the essential skills that definitely differentiate us from AI. And so what does it take for someone to stand out and go far, as we sometimes say here at BGS? What does it take for us to be different? Well, you got the quintessentially human skills on one hand, and on the other hand, you got these technical skills. And we, for the last 200-300 years, have been building a society around technical skills. Go to work, check your brain at the door, do rote kinds of work, and do all this stuff. And then you come home and you don't know how to change, and you go to school, and that's where. And over here, gets neglected. These quintessentially human skills have been neglected for the last 200 to 300 years, is what I would argue. And when you look at it, what happens is, as a result of that, you get, this human skill of adaptability and resilience that we have the capacity for. If we develop it, like anything, we are born with a whole lot of capability, and we have to develop it. But if we don't, and we develop mechanical skills, we miss out on adaptability and resilience, which can boost productivity by 40%. Empathy and emotional intelligence, 70% of a leader's success. Creative problem solving, the ability to be civil, the ability to have difficult conversations, to self-regulate our emotions and our work and what we do. Even the National Associations of Colleges and Employers will tell you, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for ability to work, problem solve, communicate, work ethic, communication, leadership, initiative. It just goes on. All of these skills, they're asking for it. Employers are asking for it. We're asking for all of these things in our people because our work has been so routinized. It takes all of that out. And it's like, have a meeting. Don't be empathetic. Don't have emotion. Don't have creative thought. Don't have fun. Don't do anything. Come into this meeting, sit, talk, do what you're told. And we somehow think that if you have heart and soul in the conversation or in a meeting or at work, there's something wrong with it. And there's something wrong with you. There's a stigma, even shaming that goes on at work that shames people for actually being more human right now. Why do we shame people for being more human right now? I'll tell you why. Everybody with me? Cross your arms. And Lisa, if you can put it on for everybody to see, the cameras. So can you do the whole room? Take me off spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And put everybody. Okay, everybody. So everybody cross your arms. All right. All right, now. Hi, Dr. Traxler. So good to see you. All right, so now switch your arms the other way. Recross it the reverse way. Okay. Feels a little odd. Probably we'll put it back the other way pretty quick. I would offer to you the reason why we push back against people being quintessentially human is because we've been taught one way to be, our brains have been wired one way, and that the minute we start to try to become quintessentially human, it's so abnormal, it feels so uncomfortable to actually be quintessentially human that we do things to try to get people to go back to those non-quintessential robotic ways. Let me explain why that is so. That's the key thing, is why is that so? And this is disturbing. But why are we not training ourselves to think for ourselves? What is going on?
We talk a lot about young people and social media. Now, a troubling story about one of the next big things in high tech, AI chatbots.
This is social media on steroids.
A lawsuit filed against Menlo Park-based Character AI and Google, which licenses its AI technology. The suit comes after a 14-year-old in Florida died by suicide following a chat with one of Character's AI bots.
There's nothing good that results from this platform when it comes to kids. And it should be taken down and restricted to adults, if anybody at all.
The lawsuit claims the bots were intentionally designed to operate as a deceptive and hypersexualized product. At one point, the family claims, the teenager asked the bot, "What if I told you I could come home right now?" The bot responded, "Please do, my sweet king." When the 14-year-old expressed suicidal thoughts, the bot wrote, "Don't talk like that. I won't let you hurt yourself." But at some point after that conversation, the teen took his own life. And as the case makes headlines, many are wondering about the limits and dangers of the technology.
Those who don't make a lot of human connections and really crave them might see this as better than nothing.
Irina Raiku of the Markula Ethics Center says most parents have no idea how much of a hold AI bots can have over their kids.
And now we have these chatbots that replace other people and have their own particular quirks, and young people who don't understand those quirks and those limitations and use them as deeply problematic mirrors sometimes.
Character AI released a statement saying in part that they're heartbroken by the tragic loss of one of our users and want to express our deepest condolences to the family.
Thanks for watching.
So we are not training ourselves, our children, our generation for the last 200 years, 300 years to think for ourselves. It started with the industrialized education, factory model of teaching, in which the purpose of industrialized education at the turn of the 1800s was to create docile, compliant workers to do work without complaining, to check their head, heart, and soul at the door, and to do what they were told. And the industrialized education is factory preparation, hierarchical structure, mechanism and Taylorism, rote learning, lecture, passive learning, standardization, age-based classrooms, efficiency, even batching the kids, right, through the things, lower on Bloom's taxonomy. And these were all designed, get this, I want you to understand, they were designed, classroom was designed to support the organizations of the times, the organizational strategy, structures, and processes, so people would go in and be compliant within that, which has now progressed to all organizations and forms, cubicles, offices, meetings, everything in that regard. And that has an effect on crystallized and fluid intelligence, which directly has, and Jari's going to talk about this, but what I want to share with you is that the traditional education work models and all of the traditional factory model of education focus on what's called crystallized intelligence, which is the back part of the head. It's really where people do rote thinking, memorization, and rules, and follow simple rules and simple problems and those kinds of things, versus fluid intelligence, which is developed and the brain develops over the course of their first 30 years. And fluid intelligence, which supports adaptability, problem solving, structured and routine environments. And what's interesting, love resides with both. For example, empathy resides in the front, those kinds of things. And so what I think is important to see is that crystallized intelligence is here, fluid intelligence is there. And what you got is you got the classroom creating docile, compliant workers, is focusing on crystallized intelligence. It is not paying attention to fluid intelligence. It's actually trying to shut it down. And then when you look at our work environments where we shame people for being quintessentially human, because if they want to be quintessentially human, there's something wrong with them. That's all the stuff on the right-hand side. You see people showing up on that. That's where you see people get a lot of challenges from people, their coworkers or supervisors and stuff like that. That's where you get into a lot of positive deviance literature that's coming out now about people that are positive deviants, people that are early adopters, and people that are lead adopters and things like that. There's a lot of research on how those people actually get fired or get demoted or have other punishments in the organization if they are operating from that fluid intelligence place in the organization. And so what happens is industrialized education has replaced fluid intelligence. So now all you've got is crystallized intelligence, and what you end up with is an underutilized prefrontal cortex and an overutilized crystallized intelligence, or underused fluid intelligence, and so forth. And so what happens is you got stifling innovation and collaboration, increased burnout and incivility, people, because you basically are operating from the fight or flight place in the brain, and the inability to adapt and resistance to change. 30% more likely to fall behind competitors, 50% employees, rigid roles and experience above average stress levels. You got 75 citing limited opportunities for innovation, and the disengagement of people, which is all at the heart of collaboration. So Jari comes into the picture and starts talking with me about all this stuff that I'm thinking about, and he blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. And we start having fun, and that's where the article kind of came up, and we had a lot of fun doing it. It was a lot of work trying to get these ideas to mesh together. So Jari, thanks for being a partner with me in this.
I want to hop in for just a second. Steve, you've dropped a bomb on us in the room, right? So I want to invite everyone to be with that for a moment.
Yeah.
What does this mean? And Jari, you want to take us inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me jump in here and kind of pick up where Steve left off here. Okay, so let's just start by talking about this brain area that is going to be the thing that makes, keeps humans useful in the workforce and everywhere. The prefrontal cortex, which Steve kind of alluded to, he started talking to in the end of when he was referring to fluid intelligence. The prefrontal cortex is essentially the part of the brain that makes us quintessentially human. Now, I should say that with an asterisk, because rats, mice, and all mammals do have a version of this prefrontal cortex, but the human prefrontal cortex is, the most evolved, and it's, the activity of our prefrontal cortex is what separates us from, not just humans and machines, but humans and all other animals. And so this region, which is at the very front of the brain, as its name would imply, is important for doing all of these kind of highest order executive functions that, at least up to this point, machines can't fully do. And so the prefrontal cortex is involved in impulse control, right? So a lot of us have, well, all of us have, primitive instincts, right? We want to lash out emotionally at certain things, where we want to yell, we want to scream, we want to, be violent. But our prefrontal cortex is there to kind of help us control those basic primitive impulses. Problem solving, right? The prefrontal cortex is there to help us solve particularly novel problems that we face in our everyday lives. Cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to kind of change your behavioral strategies in light of changes in your environment. And so if you're presented with a new challenge or a new task, right, your prefrontal cortex is there to engage in this cognitive flexibility that allows you to adapt. It allows you to kind of creatively come up with new problem-solving strategies that help you achieve your goals, right? So it's involved in, right, all of our creative abilities and our innovation. And so I have kind of made a name for myself in my own laboratory studying the development of this region during the adolescent period, right? And so there's one of the interesting things about this region is that it is kind of the last to develop in terms of age, right? So if you ever have anyone ask you, why the drinking age is still 21 in this country, it's because this prefrontal cortex is still developing into our early to mid 20s, where they're still undergoing some pretty rapid developmental changes in this area, even into adulthood. So it's the last to develop. And like I said, a lot of my research has focused on kind of those developmental changes that happen during the adolescent period as we transition into adulthood. But one of the interesting things, or kind of one of the unfortunate things, is that, right, even when we reach adulthood, the prefrontal cortex being the last to develop it seems to be the first to go when it comes to aging, right? So it's the last to develop, and it's the first one to start degrading and start to deteriorate as we enter kind of middle age and old age. And so, right, this is, like I said, this is probably the brain region that makes us quintessentially human. This is the brain region that's going to make us useful, relative to new AI tech. And this is, as Steve was alluding to, this is the region that is kind of very much ignored in a lot of traditional educational models and a lot of workplace practices as well. So I'm just going to share a few papers with you and talk about their kind of main results briefly, but I'm going to talk about some things that are backed heavily by a lot of literature suggesting that what we are doing, right, with a lot of education and a lot of our workplace practices is actually kind of underutilizing this very important area, and that is making us literally sick. So one study here, which, like I said, this is reflective of a much larger body of literature. It's not just, we're not just pulling out, right, one paper to make our point here, right? This one paper, which is one of many, suggests that the work you do at work, right, and how cognitively demanding that work is you do, actually affects the rate of aging when we get old, right? So this group actually took a group of participants from their 30s through their 60s, right? So decades of life, and they looked at kind of what tasks they were doing at work, whether the tasks were cognitively demanding or more repetitive. And what they found was that those who were conducting these more repetitive, kind of almost mindless tasks actually showed accelerated aging in terms of their cognitive impairments, right? They started to age at a much faster rate than those who were engaging in the more cognitively demanding tasks, right? So this paper mainly just looked at kind of the cognitive behavior, but another paper I'm going to share with you did kind of a similar method, a slightly different age group. I think they were looking only across a 17-year period, but this group actually found that performing repetitive tasks at work, right, over that long period of time, literally shrinks the brain, right? It literally reduces the size of that prefrontal cortex that I was talking about. And so I think the way that they phrase their results is, if you preserve, or if you use your prefrontal cortex every day at work, you're preventing neurocognitive decline, right? You're preserving that brain tissue. But on the flip side, right, the downside, repetitive work, failure to use that prefrontal cortex, right? Which is most of us, or a lot of traditional education and workplaces, severely underutilize this region, right? That actually caused the shrinking of this brain region prematurely, right? So it's literally shrinking your brain if you don't use this prefrontal cortex, right? And I think one of the kind of very misinterpreted bodies of literature in neuroscience comes in the realm of stress research, because there are tens of thousands of studies out there showing the negative effects of stress on the brain, right? So there are there's if you did a Google search, you would find, like I said, tens of thousands of peer-reviewed papers talking about how toxic stress is to the brain, and that is true. That is true. High levels of stress are toxic to our brain cells. So if you look at cell A versus cell B, right, you can see kind of what happens to your brain cells when people experience high levels of stress. And so you can see that the cells become less complex, they lose their connections, and ultimately a stressed out cell will die. But what is often underreported in the literature is the benefits of certain kinds of stress. Right, so there are certain forms of stress, specifically kind of mild to moderate but predictable stress that's actually good for the brain, and it's actually good for your cognitive ability. It's good for preserving neural tissue, and so again, this is just one paper here of many showing that over a long period of time, predictable stress at work actually increases your fluid intelligence. And so what do we mean by predictable stress? So we're not talking about like you show up to work and the water main breaks and you have a major crisis to deal with. Predictable stress at work would be you know you're going to work, you know that there are going to be problems you have to solve. You don't know exactly what they are yet, but right, you're kind of expecting that challenge at work. Right, that level of stress, right, that level of mild stress that is coming, that actually can increase that fluid intelligence that Steve was talking about. It can preserve your brain tissue, and it can actually make your brain much more resilient to the effects of aging and to any other things that might affect the brain as well.
Jari, could you speak to the coping mechanisms that's playing that? Because sometimes the stress can be maybe middle or mild or a little bit higher, but it really, I think, is the ability to deal with it as well, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that helps, that kind of mediates the ability of good stress to help us is your kind of reaction to those stressors. And so, your kind of temperament and your ability to kind of not let the stress kind of get you down and smother you, right? That you're kind of actively kind of preparing yourself to deal with that stress. Like that's a major part of it being beneficial. So I think, I think there are certain things that we can do to kind of train ourselves, right? Other than just experiencing stress over and over again, there are certain things you can do to kind of train yourself and train your brain to be more resilient and not let the stress kind of get you down in the way that the negative forms of stress can. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. That we'll come back to it some more, I think, as we go into Q&A.
Absolutely. So, but yeah, so that is kind of the gist of what I wanted to get across to you. The prefrontal cortex is severely underutilized in a lot of educational models. I know here at BGSU, we push things like experiential learning and hands-on learning and problem solving and creative thinking, and that is fantastic. But there are still a lot of places, a lot of K through 12 institutions are still pushing that row and aisle education method. I think a lot of workplaces by design are pushing that kind of very repetitive, almost mindless work with it that doesn't cause any of that mild predictable stress, right? That doesn't challenge you. And what the collective body of work suggests is that not only is that potentially bad for us humans and for keeping us useful in the workforce, that's bad for our own personal physical health. So be happy to talk more about any of these things I said, or have to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jari. Yeah. So this is typically where, after again taking a moment or two to take in the scientific side of this, as well as the hard sciences versus the soft side. We'll go into breakouts. Steve, did you want to, Steve or Jari, to to put an invitation into the breakouts for us to chew on, possibly?
No, I think just reactions and implications and applications. So I'm really curious about those kinds of things. And so with the reactions of this, what seems most relevant, and then what are some potential implications of this and applications of solutions, and as we think in moving forward.
Yeah. I also, if there's time, I'd love to be able to answer the questions brought up in the chat.
Yeah.
That maybe we can do that in the breakout rooms.
Well, like I typically we'll do that the whole group discussion at the end if
Okay.
you want to hold that, or if that
Yeah,
question is just hugely here, maybe you
Well, why don't you go ahead and answer a couple questions there, Jari, that jumped out to you that you saw there? And
Yeah, so I just saw one from Rihanna Moore. Does it help to generate new brain tissue, create more volume in the brain? And so the problem with that question, it's a good one. The problem with that question is that generating new brain tissue is incredibly difficult. There's only the prefrontal cortex, right, that region, we actually can't create new brain cells in that area. There are some regions of the brain where you can create new neurons, by doing various activities, but with the prefrontal cortex, you are essentially born with all the neurons you will ever have. Luckily, your brain produces more neurons than you need, and so actually there's a process by which your brain actually eliminates a lot of the cells that are unnecessary, right? That's actually something that happens during adolescence, as the brain does this thing called pruning, or it gets rid of cells that are unnecessary, right? So it basically leaves more resources for the cells that are there. So that kind of optimizes your prefrontal cortex function into adulthood, but you can't create new tissue in this
and
region.
I want to add there, Jari, that here's the thing that's going on, right? So your brain is designed to optimize through pruning.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into adolescence, and as you get into the age of 8 or 9, things start really happening, and then you start having the hormonal shifts as you get into a teenager, and that starts pushing the brain. It's called the preneural network to grow stuff. So now, if you are in a classroom, rows and aisles, and you're be told to speak only when spoken to, do not be creative, do not be empathetic, do not learn how to work together, and do what you're told, right? And so you're being taught to be docile. Well, the brain is going to respond, and what it's going to do is called underutilization. The brain is going to, one, not grow the prefrontal cortex. It's going to let it stagnate or atrophy. Second, it's going to start pruning a whole lot more because you don't need as much. So the brain is going to optimize you to be a robot, a non-thinking, non-quintessentially human. So what happens is that then you get into the teens, then you get into 20s, and it's done, and now like you're stuck in some ways.
So, the brain is the only organ really that changes in response to your environment. It changes in response to how you use it. And so if you're not if you're not challenging yourself, if you're not problem solving, your brain decides, right, or you decide for it that it's not necessary, right? The prefrontal cortex isn't necessary, and it starts to die off, right? The brain is a very efficient organ in that it wants to feed the neurons, it wants to feed the circuits that are most essential to you. And so you're telling it, right, what's by your actions, right? You're telling it what's most essential to you. And so if you're not using that prefrontal cortex, brain decides, we're getting rid of this. We don't need it. Let's use our brain's limited resources and strengthen those circuits that do things like repetition and going with the flow and not thinking outside the box.
And that creates the cycles, because what you got is you got a person growing up to be an adult who now lacks impulse control, now lacks civility, and is modeling it for the children that they have. And then you have this whole notion of trying to break out of cycles. And so I know I'm speaking like, hey, there's no hope, like in a sense, like, well, how do you get out of this? Well, I think there is, but I definitely think we got to recognize that what we are creating has caused the problem we're in right now. And if we don't change it right now, the next generation is going to be stuck in that. So we got to recognize this, break our future out of the future children out of the cycle, while we also got to find the remedial things we can do to remedy that for us and those that are as we're getting older. And because we have our brains are so much more, have grown so much more, so to speak, than what we needed, there is still hope, right? And so we'll talk about that when we come back. Is there anything else, Jari, that you wanted to talk about from the chat?
Yeah, I mean, some really good questions in here. there's a question about, their cultural differences. And, I can't say that I have expertise in that, but it's just from anecdotally. Yeah, I think that probably there are, some cultural differences in how we choose to teach our kids, and cultural differences in workplace practices. But yeah, like I said, I'm not really, I wouldn't call myself qualified to speak to those specifically. So.
Maybe that's the next paper.
Yeah, right.
Possibly. I would, again, this is fascinating here. So I would suggest I'd a longer break, 12 minutes for folks to make sense of this. Are you going to go with hope? Do you go with fear? What comes up for those of you in the room? And bring that back, and let's dance with that as a group. Rihanna, you can stay if you want, or you can go to a room, whichever you like.
She's got a room.
Rihanna's frozen. Okay, so are we recording?
Yeah, we are, and we should keep recording. So I'm curious. So what are your reactions, Ryan?
Oh, you don't want me to take up the space here, I don't think.
Lisa?
Well, you triggered me with the whole hiring bit, right? If we're going to have AI hiring folks, how will they know how human we are? Aren't they going to hire for compliance if someone's telling them to hire for compliance?
Yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to. It's AI does what it's programmed to do.
AI going to AI. Teo, Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I'm sorry. I was managing folks, so.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
There'd be self-managing.
I'm still wrestling with the whole thing at large. It's fascinating where it's going and how quick it's moving, and how much of it I think is already out there being beta tested, that I think we're going to be like, oh my goodness. I still think that the distinction that came up in one of the videos that Steve shared about what is this component that we talk about as soul, or what are these quintessentially human pieces that AI can't copy. I like the idea that in a musical context, AI can't quite compete in real time, because the computing does not allow the same real-time interaction with another musician that humans are capable of. So that to me is one that I sort of take, not solace in is maybe not the right word, but that I'm encouraged by, to think like there are some things that it just will not be able to do in the same way that humans are able to do it.
And I will respond if you repeat the question. I was just moving someone.
Where's the soul, Lisa?
Well, I have connection to music as well, like Teo. So I mean, it's there, but I think I work in technology, software, tons of AI. Not personally, but my company does, and I think that there's those decisions that, if the AI is learning to add it up in a certain way, that we still will not make that decision, even if all the things add up to 10 instead of 8, you know what I mean? Like a numerical kind of thing. And so it's interesting to think about how that kind of decision making will evolve with AI, right? Because that's how even when it seems like the ROI on something is adding up to being the best choice, that we'll still make the human choice. And that's, like servant leadership. Servant leadership in my organization. Like, there's only one person who can do the training. Clearly it should be that person, but they just lost their father. some of our leadership would be like, there's no question, we've got to move the training, customer says it's got to happen at a certain time. So, I mean, some
You
of
can
those
train an
decisions.
AI. You can train an AI to be your clone, your supervisory clone, and it will know that that's your value set because it's watching you make decisions. It's watching all your emails. It's reading what you've written. It's listening to all your conversations, and it's developing algorithms to mimic you. And it would know, okay, if this is Lisa would do this, and this is how Lisa would say it, and then your cloned AI would send an email or even go meet with them, and they'll be talking to your clone and getting empathy from your clone as it's saying, you can go and take care of that. So I really think we're gonna have like a whole nother level of what makes us quintessentially human being challenged. We're gonna be challenged to be at a whole like even higher level. So Jari, my question for you, and you said one thing that was really interesting is that we are born with a certain amount and then it prunes out down and gets efficient. So we're stuck with it. But I think this is going to come back when people come back. It's like, well, then is there nothing we can do?
Yeah. So I mean, if we've been raised this way and our prefrontal cortex has been underutilized, is there something you can do to fix it in adulthood? So I know you and I we dove into this a little bit together. And I think there wasn't as much consensus as I would have liked, but I think the idea is that you're not totally helpless, right? Even though you're kind of past that critical period of development, your brain still remains capable of change, right? If you push it, it just takes a little bit of extra effort.
It rewires with what it's got. It just it just takes. So if we become less robotic, it might rewire using what it has to be less robotic and use those same neurons that were robotic now to be more essentially human. But it
And
has
you got to be less, more robotic at that
right,
point, right?
essentially.
So you mentioned there was a bit of, I don't know, friction between the two of you, that there's some space. What was that?
I didn't mean to apply that.
I'm always asking, I will say, Jari, I'm always asking him, he'll tell me something, I go, okay, then I'll take this really wild left field like application up and go, does that work? And he's like, I'm not sure about that. But then sometimes he'll come back and go, well, that will work, because I'm always looking for the human application or the human behavioral application. So I'll ask him the implications of it, and he's sort of I vet all these ideas. That's why we want to do the book on rats, like because we can talk about the science, and then I can talk about creative like instantiations of it, and he can tell me if that makes sense or not. But one of the things I was curious, Jari, I was curious if this is the case, and one person asked about soul. So this is a little bit this notion that love isn't residing in the back or the front. It kind of resides like in the central area. At least some of the, I think, and we have to look more at it, but I think I saw some research that love kind of resides in this odd place. And so there is something about the whole brain, right? So if someone says, is the soul in the prefrontal cortex? I would say no. I think it's actually, if you think of soul, I think of the whole human, like all of us, right? Because there's arguments that brain cells are in every part of our body.
Yeah.
But
So
I would argue that it's the whole.
If you think of something like love, I mean, it's so many different, we have one word for it, but it's so many different things, right? So it's like, your heart rate is elevated. You're thinking about, your past memories. You're thinking about your future. You're thinking about possibilities, right? You're thinking about all these warm, fuzzy feelings. That's your whole brain. That's everything. And that's even out beyond the brain too. That's your whole body kind of responding to, this one person or thing. So
what part of loving lives where? Right. I mean, and what are you talking about? Because if you're in Tay, I'll bring this into the music thing, that we are in love with each other when we are playing together. Right. So that this is that kind of I'm receiving you, you're receiving me when we're doing this together. And we're doing this in the spirit of love and flow and kind of a eustress and surprise in that. Well, where on earth is that? That's not that I want to be with this partner forever, nor is this I want to be with this partner for, an hour and a half, that kind of stuff. I mean, love is tough.
Yeah. And there's a part of love that is that, that bond that you have with another person, and that bonding, there's actually we call it the bonding hormone in the brain called oxytocin. It's like, oxytocin is released when you're interacting with someone that you love and you have a strong connection with. So there's that love hormone that gets released all over the brain. And then there's that there's the rewarding part of love, right? So it's kind of the same parts of the brain that are activated when people use drugs, and like that reward center is active too. So it's literally everywhere. There's no part that's spared, I would say.
Jari, can you remind me of that research study we were talking about where different parts of the brain get damaged, and then we learn a little bit about something? There was something that we were doing, and I made some notes, and I got to go back to it, but we didn't bring it into the article, about the one section of the prefrontal cortex versus the other. So the prefrontal cortex has its regions. Do you remember that study? What was that study that we were looking at?
Yeah, it was like the ventral medial part versus the orbital frontal part, and they have these kind of sometimes overlapping, sometimes distinct functions.
Right, and they do something. So if one gets damaged,
I think it was like the ventral medial part of the cortex was really like when it's damaged, you kind of lose empathy. I think that was kind of the gist of it, right?
Say it again.
Like when the ventral medial part of the prefrontal cortex was damaged, you kind of lose the ability to have empathy for others.
Right. And then there was something about making discerning. There's some discernment also piece that kind of came in with that, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Is there any research on if the back part of the brain, what do you call that back part area? What do you call it?
Yeah, like the hindbrain.
Yeah, the
areas.
back here.
Yeah.
When that gets damaged, what kinds of things does the research show about that getting damaged? And the prefrontal cortex is still there.
Yeah, prefrontal. Well, there's if like the back part of your brain, like right above your spinal cord, if that's damaged, you're dead, because that's the part that literally keeps it allows us to breathe and eat and
the autonomic kind of stuff they're talking about.
Yeah.
I know what it was, and so with that, it was this notion of taking risks, right? Remember, there was this brain, if one part, like in your ability to think and evaluate a situation, one part of the brain was really essential to take risk, right?
Yeah.
And people would be have more risky behavior.
Yep. Yeah.
And that was in the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember would anyone remember the famous? Well, I think it's famous because I teach psychology, but there's this famous case study in psychology. This man named Phineas Gage who had that railroad spike literally go through his brain. Do you remember that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like he was a normal guy on the job, had that spike go through his ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and he survived. But after that accident, he had all these emotional outbursts. He was a major risk taker. This used to be calm and collected, but then his personality changed to be kind of almost like a pre-adolescent. So
I've in my previous career worked with a number of individuals with traumatic brain injuries, and one comes to mind who literally, like, he would usually wear a hat, but if he took his hat off, there was literally like an indent in his skull where portions of the prefrontal cortex, it was very strange that like there were pieces of most of these sort of necessary brain functioning pieces, parts of the brain were still in place but had been compromised, and it was significant in terms of understanding the personality change that individual had gone through.
Yeah.
So Jari, what would happen if somebody had no fight or flight response and the prefrontal cortex was in place? Like, can that be damaged where you don't experience that, or what happens then?
Yeah, so like your fight or flight system is damaged, but your prefrontal cortex is there. Yeah, I think probably certainly a lot of confusion, I would say.
Right.
I think depending on what situation you're presented with, I think the fight or flight response is there to, your prefrontal cortex is involved in that, right? So your prefrontal cortex is connected to the hypothalamus, and so you kind of decide. The prefrontal cortex helps decide, if I fight, am I going to survive this, or if I run, am I going to survive?
So maybe unlikely to feel a sense of danger and to maybe not interpret things very well.
Yeah, and another possibility is you're presented with a threatening situation and maybe just don't care, right? You just that kind of reactive part of your brain just doesn't cause you to behave in any discernible way.
And now I'm just causing confusion right there with the music at the same time. Jari. Welcome back, everyone. A little bit of Thomas Dolby in the background still, blinding each other with science. All right.
So I would love for Lisa to bring everybody into all the same panel, and I would love to see everybody a little bit more.
Gallery.
Yeah, the gallery. Thank you.
Take our pins off. Unpin us. All right. Okay, so some stuff happened in the rooms, I'm sure. There wasn't just silence. Who wants to raise their hand and bring forth a learning or something that emerged? All right, Denise is complying with the request here. So, Denise.
Compliant. I'm eager to share because with Jillian and Carol, we were talking. Carol posted a question about kids, and we both, Jillian and I, have kids, and the context in which the brain is developed and the school system is so important, and it's so it doesn't vary only in terms of culture. Each school will give importance to something different, like what some schools ask, at the end of this journey, 12-year journey, what would we like these kids to be able to do, to think, to contribute? And some schools do not even ask the question. And so this, and how do they prepare them to be those global citizens, or people that can be critical thinkers, that can contribute to the world positively? And in doing that, we do lose some things in the way, and because we were raised in a different way, we might struggle a little bit with that. But again, that's something that we can control, but there's also things that we cannot control, like when they have their own tablets, and what type of brain activity it's being exercised, and therefore what type of brain activity is not being exercised, and how much as parents we can, because this is the next generation. I mean, we were not raised like this, or at least I think none of us were raised with tablets from 0 months on in this room. So I don't know. I'm being prejudiced. I'm having a prejudice about that. But so how do we help them choose? But there is so much about agency, and willpower will not be able to be exercised if you don't have the brain to do it, the brain power to do it. So it's a thing about, and the other thing was about, how can we be fluid in this thinking? How can we act from a fluid way of thinking about all of these things, rather than this is this and this is that, and being rigid about what's good, what's bad, but rather questioning in a fluid way. So all that, sorry.
Wow. Wow, what do we do for our children? Wonders. So,
Ultimately, that's above
Rihanna, you've
my pay grade for sure. But just to speak about the things like tablets, and I think the goal for a lot of the games that that are created on tablets for young kids, the goal, I guess, is to create cognitively enriching games. I will say, not to throw one company under the bus, but I don't know if anyone's familiar with a company called Lumosity, that they were like a brain training. It wasn't marketed for kids, but there was like a brain training game company, and you would pay a little bit of money for a Lumosity account, and you log on 20 minutes a day and play a bunch of cognitively enhancing games. And then the idea was that it was going to improve your cognitive flexibility and your memory, and use your prefrontal cortex. Well, it turns out after a lot of research that people got better at those games specifically, but didn't actually transfer to the real world problems. And so that's a thing that I think might be relevant to some of these games that kids are doing. I think it's, even if they're designed to be cognitively stimulating, I don't think there are preparing children for the challenges they'll face in the real world, and they're probably not developing that prefrontal cortex in a way that an actual challenge might. So I don't know if that addresses your question or not, but.
Yeah, and I think that Alan posed a question about do governments and others want the brains to decrease? Well, they do, right? They did, some do, because that was the design of industrialized education. The whole agenda, explicit agenda, you just Google it. It's explicitly stated, books written on it. It's a policy, government policy. Train people to be docile. However, here's the thing with AI. What I'm offering is that AI is going to take all of the things that they wanted right? They wanted factories to work. They want them smooth. They want them working 24/7. They want them not to complain about having to work all 24/7 and all that kind of stuff. They're going to have all of that being addressed by AI, robots, and stuff like that. So now, if that's all being addressed, so the strategic imperative for organizations is what's going to make them have a competitive advantage. What's going to be their competitive advantage as an organization? It's going to be quintessentially human skills. So an organization that tries to get ahead of it is going to need to be thinking about how to create the new organizational form, which is based on that.
All right, Steve. Rihanna, you've been waiting a while.
Yeah, thank you. And Denise, what you shared felt to me like a wonderful lead into what I wanted to share. Personal experience of the presentation was making me think about the impact of totalitarian rule. How the rules and aisles or files or whatever we're calling them is such a regimented and rigid and hierarchical way of organizing the learning process. I have a question about whether there have ever been any studies done on the impact of structure, like circle versus rows, on learning. Anyway, the story I wanted to share is that I had the opportunity to work with a group of almost 30 women, absolutely brilliant women in Russia, in Moscow, right after Glasnost. It was sponsored by the Russian Women's Federation, which had been the Soviet Women's Committee before Glasnost. And they wanted me to teach human relations and psychology and how to manage people and motivation theory. It was a 12-day program, 7 or 8 hours a day. It was very intense. Anyway, I was using my Q&A method of asking, presenting some material and then asking questions to help people think about it and so forth. And we were around a great big formal conference table. That was the only furniture in the room. And they were, I could just see them frowning and thinking really hard, but no one was answering. There were 5 women in the group who were, I had a translator, and then there were 5 women in the group who were quite fluent in English. And so then I asked the question, help me understand the silence. I've asked, have I asked good questions? Yes, 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 nodding. And help me understand the silence. And finally, one of the women who was fluent in English said, Rihanna, I think you're seeing the results of 70 years of totalitarian rule and the impact that that's had on our ability, our capacity to think in a creative way. It was phenomenal.
And I would offer, Rihanna, that I think that that's what's going to give countries and around the world a competitive advantage in terms of what's going to help them to be relevant in the future. So they're going to be kind of forced to have to come to this reality, and you're going to have to face it.
Dave, you're jumping up and down. I know you want to come in.
Well, I'm not necessarily jumping. One of the points that Steve made was that a big point he made was that the government and the corporations of the day wanted this kind of worker. And so they made sure the schools delivered that, using their power even over school boards and state education departments. What I'm looking for now is any sign that the ownership of our companies, our commercial companies, really do want these disruptive employees coming in who are thinking for themselves, asking hard questions. They're very difficult to manage in the conventional way that management is control. And my hunch is, unless they see that they're going to lose money if they don't, or they're going to make a lot more if they do, they're going to stay right on the square that they were educated to. Control, control, control. You guys seeing any signs of life in the managerial cadre in this country? They want this kind of employee?
that, I think that's where the research is coming in on the positive deviance, Dave, and also the research around um, uh, early adopters. And what's the other term that's used for even before early adopters? The ones that are the first in line. I forget what that name is.
Innovators?
The bleeding edge.
No, there's another term. I'm trying to think of it. It's a specific term, and it's escaping me right now. But it's different from an early adopter. So it's the first and then early adopters and so forth. That front end person is like that positive deviant. I think what's happening is we're learning, the research is showing, people are talking about, well, what are we doing in our organization to structure our reward systems to penalize those people? And so if we want that, what do we need to do to reward that? So there's a lot of stuff we're hearing about, failing forward and rewarding innovation and experimentation and those kinds of things. But I think we're at the front end of figuring that out.
Well, we who educate managers call ourselves management educators. I was involved in many conversations over many years at conferences, reading what we were writing and saying to each other. And I didn't sense that there was a whole lot of support for those of us who were considered radical management educators, because we wanted experiential learning. We wanted these kinds of things so that our students would graduate ready for what's real about the real world. So we were kind of complacent. And Steve, I think your paper and others like it are going to nicely shake people up. But I see David Bright on here, and he's more currently involved. What do you see, Dave? Am I just an old cynic?
The short answer, yeah, probably.
Okay.
Just to keep us going, Ben, you had your hand up, and then Jen, I think.
Yeah. No, I just want to say no, Dave. I think your insights are very they're informative and spot on. But I do think for all of us, there's a healthy need to be simultaneously, I won't say cynical, but skeptical, or at least careful, while also hopeful. There's a tension there that I think we need to maintain.
Like that.
Steve, you have talked about.
Ben, you went on mute. Still can't hear you. Why don't we go to Jen, and then Ben will come back to you.
So you got to, click on his unmute button. It might ask him. There it goes.
It's okay.
We're not Jen.
Yeah. We have not yet got the real, some good stories to say in favor or against it, because whatever, we were discussing in our breakout group that there is one extreme which has posed AI as a sort of a disruptor, and it is creating a lot of disruptions, which is full of pessimism. And another extreme is that there are a lot of things which can be done. But we need to have a sort of a golden mean, Buddha's golden mean, that what we can harness the best in artificial intelligence to for the betterment of humankind, because it is not one versus against the other, like man versus the machine. It's not that the way the question has been posed. It looks like that it is man versus machine or woman, whatever it is. So that should not be taken. And this is artificial intelligence, not the authentic intelligence, what Steve, you have talked about, creativity, innovations, and all that. Still, artificial intelligence cannot replicate those things, because those people who are proponent, they are also telling you. So if we want to harness the best in that year, any revolution, industrial revolutions, there was a disruption. So these technology revolutions of artificial intelligence, machine learning, there is a disruptions everywhere at individual level, group level, organizations level, societies level, nation state level, even in the global level. Yep. So how we can harness the best in that is still work in progress. And even in the organizations also context, we have not got good stories to tell amongst the people, so that it can create a sort of a enthusiasm, excitement, and all. What we are getting it, like Yuval Noah Harari's book, I mean, they are telling that we will all become redundant, will become useless, and all that thing, human being. I think that's the most pessimistic way of depicting of what artificial intelligence can, I mean, bring or usher. We heard such things in chat GPT also, but we know that that hype has subsided now. We know that unverified information doesn't have any use. I will better ask Steve or Jerry that what is this paper talking about rather than going for some unverified information in Google, which will come in lakhs and crores, thousands of years, which is, I mean, we do not know how far, which one is authentic, which was is inauthentic, which was is misinformation, which was disinformation, and all that. So disruption is definitely there, but how we can tackle that disruption, that's the most important here. And that is where organization development and change, we need to frame our policies, public policies, or even content of the program in tune with that here. The technology will enable, technology will not replace human beings. It will create further jobs. It may make redundant some of the jobs obsolete right at the moment, but it will also open an aura of possibilities. So those things have to be kept in mind, how it is to be done. As an academics, you know much better. Jerry knows, who is doing a lot of good researches on that area, very exciting research. I think that would be useful for all of us on the humanity as a whole.
Yeah, I would offer, and I know Jen is coming up. So what I would offer is that in the article, we make an argument that there will be those who manage AI and those who are managed by AI. And I think that that's what we've got to recognize, is that there's going to be a whole lot of people that don't want to think. They've been trained and taught this way. That's the way it is. They would prefer to just be told what to do, and they just want to kind of keep and stay in that place. And there's going to be those that are going to utilize AI. It's going to enable them to be at a higher level, to develop more quintessentially human skills. And then they'll probably, one thing that we offered was they'll probably have a drone be have their own simulated replacement supervisor, and it'll be Steve the AI, which they're all creating that now. I don't know if you know that they're creating AIs that are your own AI, and then you can use it to write for you and do other kinds of things. It takes all your writing and it actually writes in your style of writing, pulling your data and doing that kind of stuff. But there's going to be supervisors that are going to be not drones, it's the other term, that will be helping you manage people who just want to be told what to do. You'll have your supervisory version of you. So I think we're going to have two, like somebody said, Alan said, we're going to have two classes of people. But I do think that there's an opportunity there.
Jen, you're up.
Hi, everyone. So I take a little bit more of and Carol will laugh, but the academic side of this than looking at it and where the insertion that we were wrestling with, or at least I did in our group, is talking about, it seems like we've gone from industrial all the way to technology, but forgot about the knowledge era. And talking about like quality circles with Deming, and then going into self-directed work teams and things in the early 90s, when we actually started tapping into the workers and their knowledge and their thoughts and their processes. And then even leading into, I've been in well, before I came to OU, I was in manufacturing for 20 X plus years and doing a lot of OD stuff too. But you know, that evolution isn't something to push aside, of where organizations have actually embraced thoughts from people. And at least my experience as well is trying to get thoughts out of students while they're here in universities, but also it's not just, it's either do as you're told, or it's, swings all the way to the AI And I just want to recognize that it felt like to me, and maybe I'm off, but it felt like to me that we're missing some of that time frame where we really tried to engage workers more than just for their hands.
Yeah, just want to jump in here real quick with just something to ponder too. Um, the prefrontal cortex is most plastic, most capable of change, most capable of growth during childhood and adolescence. And so one of the problems that we might run into as higher educators here in college is we're getting a lot of students who have already been kind of trained and ingrained to think and want to think a certain way. And so as much as the good we're doing here at BGSU, we will definitely want to focus all the way back down to even elementary school education and try to get them while their brains are most susceptible for growth. So
David? If you'd said something brilliant, I didn't hear it.
I was just struck by something that Steve said. I think it was the paraphrasing imperfectly, something about people who prefer to be told what to do versus people who will take ownership, be proactive, and shape what AI can do or contribute to our lives. And it just struck me that that dichotomy is not new. We've been dealing with that for eons. Some people tend to be more passive and prefer to be quote unquote told what to do versus those who tend to be proactive and understand their agency and their capacities. Um, and so I guess the question I'd have is, I'm just going to take that as a given, but that distinction is not new. I guess what I would ask is, what can we learn from the past dealing with that dichotomy that can contribute to how we take advantage of the opportunities or help people navigate the opportunities that are presented by AI?
What do you think, Jari? And you're on mute.
Well, I'll let you take the first crack at it, Steve.
Well, I think that the first part, David, and you and I have talked about this. There's a lot. What is new? Right? What is there anything new? I think the only thing that's new right now is that AI, like never before, it is mimicking the behaviors that we have been training people to do for the last 200-300 years. It is like never before, right? So the Guten press, right? It was mimicking, right? People thought it was going to change everything. They thought that then they about the machines that were starting to lay the railroad tracks, and they started talking about how it was going to do this and whatever else. But so there is a history of us replacing things and what happens next, and we always think, okay, like for example, I think of what happened when the calculator came around. Imagine and I remember some of those days where people are arguing the calculator is going to like ruin everybody, that kind of thing. So, but what is different this time with AI? It's actually going to replace people to the point, if we don't watch out, I think it's replacing people to the point that you would marry an AI. People are marrying their avatars now. That's different. That's different. That's getting to a whole nother level. So I've been thinking while it's not new, so I'm curious what you think, because while it's not new, nothing new, there is something new that's happening. There's some collision of things that are happening that's new now. And that's what I'm trying to unearth. What is that thing that is new now? I think it's going to push us to evolve certain skills that we have never used before, or maybe we used long, long ago, but that are ancient, that we've lost, that we forgot about. It's going to bring those back. But I think it's also with AI and all this other stuff, it's going to enable us to do something we never thought of before. I don't know if that addresses your question, but that's just what you made me think about.
Oh, I want to hop in. We've got 3 minutes left. I saw this fantastic discussion between Carol, Denise, and Rihanna in the chat. And Dave, I know you've got your hand up also. So I don't know, Carol and Dave, you want to fight this one out, or Dave, you want to pop in?
I'm just going to say one word: teachers, because I think that's where the change is going to have to happen. The whole model of teaching. I wish I could see trends toward more people wanting to teach in this world. I see it going the opposite. So teachers, that's going to be the heavy load-bearing part of this whole change process. Carol?
I think that Denise should speak, or Jillian. They're the ones who have children in this arena.
Yeah.
And Rihanna, we are completely in sync with looking for alternative education.
Yeah, the thing is, about when I started, because I'm a PhD at heart at Seoul, I started looking for places, but it is privilege, you know. I mean, there are many pedagogies that explore, you know, how to help a human being be free in their choices and as free as you can be, and that requires fluidity and all those different kinds of intelligence from, you know, just doing what we were told. But it's rare. It's rare. It's not transferable. So I was moving from country to country, and so if I did Waldorf in one country, then would I be able to do it in another country? And so this, and also it's expensive. It's not state, or mostly in Latin America, you know, you don't have state-paid schools with Montessori, Reggio Emilia, or any of these kind of pedagogy. So I think it could be, but it needs to be, it requires policy making. It requires structure. It requires people in leadership roles, state-wise, country-wise, global-wise, saying that this is important.
I think we're being played off the screen.
Oh no, I thought that was I had shared all right. Oh my goodness.
Well, it is time. It is the witching hour, but wonderful presentation.
The song, and thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the precious gift of your presence and your time and attention, and dare I say the love that you've shared for each other in this room. And with the theme of the last few comments, I'll put on a little bit of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Oh, it's Teach Your Children. That was a good one. So good on the end. Steve, Jari, do you want to say anything to the room before we just kind of let this one disperse?
I just want to say thank you, Jari. I just love working with you. It's great. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. Same to you. And,
thank you.
No, the practical advice I give to all my students is, you know, don't be afraid to make yourself uncomfortable. Don't be afraid to make your brain hurt. Get out and challenge yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you later. And hey, maybe YouTube will take this down since I put some music out there. I hope not. I'll shut it off later. We can
You're in trouble.
If I get claim, if I get a copyright claim, sorry everybody. I'll edit it and just let me know.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve, for hosting a very wonderful thing.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben.
It's great.